Hello, my name is Sid Chopra. I'm here with Russ Klein, the CEO of the American Marketing Association. Russ was the Chief Marketing Officer of Arby's Restaurants, the President of Global Marketing and Strategy and Innovation for Burger King Corporation, and the Chief Marketing Officer of 7-Eleven. Russ has also studied social currency and rooted in mathematical frameworks at Harvard and hyper empathy at the Second City Players. He has a BS and a BA in marketing from Ohio State University and has won the Order of Pythagoras as a National Student of the Year for Acacia Fraternity. How has your knowledge of marketing changed the way you present information?
Fundamentally, marketing is about creating solutions or creating offerings that are desirable and sources of pleasure, sources of joy for people. And so in doing that, it takes a set of sensing skills to know the difference between inventions that are just unique because of their features and their apparent benefits, and inventions that are true value creators for the customer. And when I look at when I coach companies on innovation process, so often innovation gets stalled out or stymied because those responsible for the innovation are trapped in thinking about features and benefits rather than thinking about the ultimate value creation that their particular idea will provide for the consumer. And a lot of times, ideas that in fact have tremendous value for the customer get discarded because of an over focus on whether or not the bells and whistles or the features and benefits are apparent to someone. I like to refer to Airbnb as an example of someone who, had they not understood the ultimate value of what their concept represented, and instead focused on sort of the features and benefits of what they originally built in pursuit of creating that value, they would have stopped before they went to market, and they would have quit. Because the first several permutations of Airbnb, people were rejecting the exact elements and features that they had created. But the folks at Airbnb saw the value that they were trying to create. They knew that there was a value in providing this sort of cost-efficient, accessible pieces of real estate all around the world where people could go into communities and enjoy experiences in a way that stays at expensive hotels and so forth could never replicate. And they stayed focused on that value creation until they figured out the actual construct itself. And I think a lot of innovators and inventors focus on the bells and whistles and don't spend time developing the value creation that it represents for the customer, whether it's a B2B customer or B2C customer, and therefore they fail to communicate that value to a potential investor or a potential a person who has decision rights on whether the project goes on. And so it takes a holistic focus on what is the value creation that's involved, so that the inventor or the innovator themselves doesn't give up until they have cracked the code for that, and they worry less about features and benefits, and likewise, as they communicate to other stakeholders, that they have the ability to create clear messaging around what that value creation is. And really, that's the essence of what marketing is. Everything else marketers do are sort of details and different, mixes, if you will, different expressions of the marketing mix. But ultimately, it's about solutions. And are those solutions creating value for the customer? Can that brand or company articulate that value, both to the people they need to get it created, as well as to the people they need to buy it, that they're hoping will acquire it?
You've sat in a number of pitches over your your career, what do you see that people do wrong when they're trying to pitch an idea?
Well, to me, one of the most important things a presenter can do is to prepare by knowing their audience. Every audience takes on information differently. If you're presenting to a group of scientists, if I, for instance, were presenting to a group of scientists, I would know to not go light on details and to not go light on, to not prematurely present assertions before I've demonstrated why they are rational outcomes of a set of variables. Conversely, if I'm presenting to a fast-moving, time-starved CEO who just wants to know the bottom line, then I may focus very much on the first thing, like, this idea is worth $180 million in gross profit, in order to get their attention, and then they will sit down and watch the rest of the presentation. So it's really knowing who is your audience, first of all, and then being able to tailor your presentation so that that audience can consume it with the least amount of mental and emotional friction as possible. You need to know where your audience stands on an issue. If they already have opinions that you need to disabuse them of. These are all parts of what make great presenters and great presentations, are knowing who your audience is going to be. And so that's step one. And then step two, for me, it's very difficult for me to ever imagine a presentation where you wouldn't want to have the ultimate benefit in the first few slides of that presentation, which is the value. What is the value creation that will result from you buying this or supporting or investing in this idea? So appealing to the audience's self-interest in a way that, in a language, quote unquote, that they speak are the first steps of any great presentation.
The pitch is a very, very difficult presentation. It's one of the rare scenarios where there's really significant consequences for failure and consequences for success. There's competition. There's people that are being are evaluating what you say, and they're going to actually try to attack to verify that this is in fact correct and poke holes in your argument.
Yeah.
It's a very challenging scenario. It's not I'm going to stand up in front of the audience and be the sage on the stage kind of scenario.
Right.
What do you find are the common mistakes that entrepreneurs or marketers or anybody that has a great idea? What things do you see that drive you crazy?
Well, I sort of intimated some of them earlier. I think, again, an inventor or, a creator of some idea who is unable to articulate the values created by that invention for other people is not overly fascinated with their idea themselves. People who are too pleased with their own idea can send a kind of an annoying signal to an audience. Knowing the audience, knowing the language they speak is really the thing I notice most often, is someone taking the time to understand what matters to me if I'm the guy with the checkbook. And, does what matters to me the profitability? Does what matters to me getting a strategic entry into a particular space? Does what matters to me social impact? All of these things are represent a spectrum of things that would vary by every audience, right? And so, to me, someone who has not taken the time to dial in to the self-interest, not of themselves, but of their audience, and that's why this notion of, quote, the pitch, or we have a pitch deck, is probably the right off the bat a mistake, because to assume that there is some universally appropriate pitch deck belies the idea that there in fact are unique audiences. You're always presenting to unique audiences and unique individuals. So understanding stakeholders, understanding where stakeholders stand on certain issues and knowing, like, what am I going to say in this presentation that's going to move SID from being negative to neutral, or move SID from being neutral to positive, or from positive to, ready to sign, and being very systematic and strategic about, here's who I'm presenting, here's what their self-interests are, and now am I able to construct my offering, my idea, in a way that appeals to those self-interests, rather than it just being kind of like change the name on the cover sheet of my pitch deck and walk into the next guy. That's usually, what you can usually tell quite easily, Now, some pitch decks can be, essentially done in a nice universal way, but they still, I can't imagine any deck that doesn't benefit from some hand smoothing to better reflect the self-interest of the audience.
Personalization matters.
Right. Just as we know it matters all around the world for marketers. Now it matters for presenters who are essentially marketers of their own ideas to an audience who are their buyers. And again, these same concepts sort of run through whether you're on the manufacturing or the creating side, or you're on the buying side, or you're on the consumer side. Being able to identify the value creation piece and being able to articulate what that is, that's where, the prize is. And I'm not suggesting it's always easy, but, I think it was, I don't know, it was either Einstein or Drucker or somebody said something to the effect that if you can't explain your idea easily to someone else, you don't know enough about it. And so I think that it's incumbent upon every inventor to know enough about what the value is that's being created, not just about their invention per se, but what is this really addressing in the marketplace? What is the value creation? And if you can't explain that, then you still don't know enough about it. And you need to go back to the drawing board or go back to your own people and say, help me tease out what is the value creation here from this idea. And if you get that wrong, I'll give a simple example. This is a really low-tech example, but I was advising a company for a friend, a guy named David Barnett, who went out to his garage about 4 years ago because his headphones on his cell phone, the wires on his headphones were getting tangled up. So he went to a craft store, went into his garage, and he glued this big button on the back of his phone to wrap his headphone cords around. And he started making them for his family members and so forth. And they came back to him. They said, David, this is cool, but you know what? With the advent of, what you need to do is get a pair, first of all, of wireless headphones, because that's kind of what everybody's got now. But guess what? The value of what you've created here is I can control my phone better now. I can take selfies more easily. I can set my phone up and watch a movie. And the next thing you know, he's got a $300 million business 4 years later. And he's the second fastest growing company in I think, Fast Company, because someone helped him identify the real value, right, that was created. And by the way, that company is still, I won't say struggling, but they're still working to refine what is the value of that? What is the value of being able to control your phone? And how do I communicate that to people? Is it really just about, people don't really just want to control their phone. Why do they want to control their phone? Well, they want to be able to take selfies, but why do they want to take selfies? They want to be able to share their life with their friends and vice versa. So you have to look for where that's the value. Where is the higher value, right? And what that, what the idea that they came up with, which I quite like, but for strategic reasons I think can be better, but they came up with this campaign called Phone Better. So I can use my phone better to do all the things I do with my phone because I can control it more easily. So, the world is filled with lots of really interesting innovations and inventions that have not quite come into focus in terms of what the value is that they deliver. And when that's unlocked, boom, then it looks like it was obvious after the fact. But, which is usually the case with great insights, is that they look obvious after you've discovered them.
You were a researcher, and I know that the American Marketing Association does a lot of research. They put a lot of effort into that. You must deal with a lot of scientists. Do you find that the scientists that you've dealt with have any kind of communication training or presentation training?
It varies. And while I have led many research projects and have done a lot of qualitative research on my project, I wouldn't call myself a researcher. I'd call myself a strategist in sort of the general sense. The Marketing Academy that the AMA is in service to, besides industry-side marketers, marketing academics split into three areas, really: quantitative academic researchers, consumer behavior academic researchers, and then general strategy academic researchers. And I would say that the presentation skills across those three segments they each have some great presenters in them, and they also have some pathetic presenters. So I think that if there is training that goes on in the Marketing Academy or in academia in general, if there is training, it would appear to me to be very uneven and maybe differ by institution, differ by even perhaps the mentor that brings up a particular academic as a doctoral student, how much emphasis is placed on their ability to present their ideas in addition to developing, great hypotheses and being able to observe phenomena, which are, of course, the core jobs. But being able to actually articulate the value creation, deliver compelling presentations, I would say that the academia is a very uneven distribution of quality presenters and presentations. I think it would be unfair to say nobody is a good presenter, because there are some outstanding presenters. One of my professors from Ohio State used to have two carousels running at the same time. He was like John Williams, the conductor, with his ability to make things go on in lights and visuals and so forth. And there are plenty of other presenters like that in today's day and age, but there are still lots of academics that literally put copies of textbooks up on their PowerPoint and will read, from them and make you read from them. And so, so that there's a real wide, variety. And when I work with some of those academics, I, try to gently say, especially since sometimes I'll share the stage with them on a particular project. And I'll say, you know what, your work is outstanding. Would you mind if I took it and tried to add some design sensibilities and some layout sensibilities and some communication sensibilities to this, so that maybe we'll be even more effective than we would have been had we not changed a thing. And, I usually meet with some degree of acceptance and welcomeness, but not always. Some people think it's all about the work, and that the work should speak for itself, and that it should be obvious to everyone, and that if I put this thing up on a PowerPoint, and if you can't read along, then you're not, then I don't care, kind of thing, right? And so obviously, that's going to have limited success if that's the way you roll.
We have a situation in the press where this young 16-year-old girl from Sweden is now become maybe perhaps the most visible spokesperson for climate change.
Yes, I've seen her.
It's kind of remarkable that it would take somebody who was a 16-year-old to galvanize and to capture the news cycle and increase all our awareness about climate change. Neil deGrasse Tyson said that science needs better marketing. But the scientists that we've done research with and the institutions, the education institutions that we've talked to, it seems like the scientists, while they have access to this training, they don't avail themselves of it. It's not, they're not really encouraged to get it. They're not incentivized to get it. And as a result, they would be better off spending their time becoming a better researcher than a better communicator. And so the net result is they don't get those skills. Now, when they're looking for research ideas, there's a problem when they start having to commercialize their ideas. And a lot of times they just say that's a marketing problem. That's marketing's issue. I'm the inventor, I'm the thought leader. I'm just going to pass that off to them. Do they really need these communication skills, this understanding of marketing? What's the advantage for them to invest in getting these skills when there ultimately will be somebody who's in charge of marketing working with them?
Yeah. Well, I don't even want to say unfortunately. I think humans are easily bored, and particularly in this day and age, and they crave novelty and uniqueness. And take the climate change issue, which I like to think of myself as being a radical centrist on most issues. Wherever you stand on climate change, and what the problem is and what the solutions are, the example that you cited about this 16-year-old young lady, she is obviously a precocious, articulate, and sincere, earnest believer in the issues around climate change. And the fact that she's a 16-year-old attractive young person, I think everybody wants to have faith in our future, to see our children well schooled and learned and curious. And so she represents I think an example of why the 10,000 people who said the same things before her didn't get the news cycle, and she did. And so sometimes there's lightning in a bottle when it comes to the presenter, the circumstances. I like to often say that there can be no great president without some sort of adversity. If you think, we all look back on who all our great presidents were, but none of them would have the distinction that they have now, but for how they led during adversity, right? And so there may have been dozens of other more capable presidents among the last 40-odd some United States presidents, but not all of them had a chance to lead during World War II or during the Civil War and so forth, which gave those presidents a chance to rise above to almost a surreal kind of, status. So people respond to I think people who are able to show tremendous poise during adversity, and that to me is a little bit of the juxtaposition of that young lady who spoke. She wasn't being hysterical, she wasn't shouting, she showed, I think, a grace and a poise, and I think that really impressed people around an issue that, again, varying degrees of people put somewhere on a spectrum of alarming. And I would say that if you really look at if you look at whether or not science needs marketing, it starts with this idea of what people believe marketing is. And you saw my presentation, and I believe that in the future state, an ideal expression of what marketing is a world where everything is bought and nothing is sold. And the reason I think that's an important dynamic is because marketing has earned a bad name in many corners and still has a bad name in many corners because it's seen as foisting something upon somebody they don't want. And therefore that's not necessary, maybe even not real, maybe not even going to deliver the promises that it makes. And so for so long as the discipline of marketing has that kind of overhang on it, I think you'll always see, so-called scientists bridle a little bit at what they believe is a search for the truth. Usually, that's sort of the mindset of a scientist, is they have this insatiable, this rage to find the quote truth, and that any attempt to spin it or frame it or position it is somehow disingenuous or dishonest, when in fact, the very idea, as soon as the first words come out of any inventor or scientist's mouth, they're marketing. Whether or not they want to admit it, they are. And so to get somebody over the idea that marketing is not about selling people things they don't want or convincing them that things exist that don't really exist. Marketing is about dramatizing, I think, solutions and dramatizing the value that's created from those solutions in a way that makes people aware of them. And then if the idea is right and appropriate, people will buy it. People will buy the idea around climate change, or buy the idea when the notion of marketing as the kind of the negative side of marketing intersects with science. Again, you see people turn away and bridle. One of the problems around persuasion in general is I think John Roberts wrote a book called Igniting Inspiration, and he basically said there are only three ways you can change people's minds. You can force them. I'm your boss, Sid, and I'm going to wave my stripes on you, or I've got a contract, you have to do this. So you can force someone, and we know how that usually turns out. The second thing you can do is you can try to persuade them through, quote, rationalization. And the problem with that is often that in that process, people start to omit facts, they start to embroider facts, and suddenly you're dealing with some version of the truth when people are trying to persuade other people. The third area that he contends, and I agree, and this is how I've lived my whole life, is the way to move people, to change people's minds, is to inspire them by seeing a vision that you paint for them, which is the synonym for that is value that we were talking about earlier. Painting a vision of value for them in which they see themselves playing a starring role. That's what inspiration is. And if I can do that with climate change, or I can do that with a widget that's going to help people, help heart failure be reduced, or whatever it is, if I can articulate that vision in a way that my audience can see themselves playing a starring role, my work is done as a marketer, right? Now, many marketers operate in the first two areas of persuasion. And that's where, again, marketing can get a bad name. It can feel annoying. It can feel overbearing. It can feel dishonest. It can feel deceiving. The great marketers, just as the great scientists out there, I think if you went off and did an analysis of great inventions and great inventors and studied their presentations, I'll bet it would be fascinating. I bet you and I could find patterns, common patterns to those so-called great inventors who were successful at getting their ideas across, and maybe other ideas that were apparently of equal value, scientific value, that are still under a barrel somewhere. I bet you we could find what it is about those scientists in terms of how they presented, how they fashioned their cases, and how they were able to get across that value, painting that value vision so that other people could see themselves starring in that picture. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So one of the things I have I've coached and presented to probably over 1,000 entrepreneurs over the years, is that the value of a great idea is zero if it can't be communicated effectively. And
it's kind of Leo Burnett, where I was born. My cradle of professionalism was born at Leo Burnett, the ad agency, back when Burnett was was a McKinsey, if you will, of agencies. And Leo used to say, "There's no such thing as great advertising if it doesn't air." And he would say that to his people who would come in and who failed to sell their clients on what so-called great work was. He was like, "It's not great if it's not on the air, so you figure it out," right? And so it's just another example.
I've been trying to forward the science of presentations, and one of the things I have noticed is that right now we have been able to, for the first time in the entire history of humanity, we can look inside a living human brain and see what happens when we're thinking of different things. And this is dramatically changed. It's exploded our knowledge of neuroscience and cognitive psychology and behavioral science. And interestingly enough, I was looking back over things and seeing who the early adopters are of the research that's coming out of neuroscience and cognitive psychology. And it turns out that it was, throughout history, it was marketers and magicians. And maybe now politicians are adding into that mix.
It's funny you say that because, if you do an archetypal assessment of different industries and different professions, the marketer archetype is the magician.
So how has marketing, how is this new science changed the way we market to people?
Well, I think it's an allied idea to what we were talking about earlier, and it comes with great responsibility, which is again why I am, pounding this mantra on marketers. Anytime I can get in front of them, I've spoken to tens of thousands of marketers by now over this idea that we have a responsibility to get great ideas that are useful and helpful to people, and to also not use increasingly available tools of persuasion in a deceitful way or in a manipulative way. When was a number of years ago, actually by now, that I read a study about somebody's a claim that they with 90% success through the use of neuroscience tools, they could find the exact right communication to get somebody to buy a widget, and I found that troubling, and only to the extent that if we are not responsible stewards of our craft, and we use marketing, neuroscience. I've said this again in the presentation I was where you and I met, is that if marketers are using their newfound access to data and analytics to figure out how to better sell or to create come-ons or know exactly when to hit you with an email, if they're spending more time, money, and resources on using those new superpowers on that, as opposed to building and innovating superior solutions, improving products and services democratizing quality and making it affordable products to more trading areas around the world, if they're not using all of those superpowers for that, and instead on the self-interest of the sort of quarterly earnings report, shame on us. And eventually, the consumer will put us out of business. It'll take time, but people will not accept that. And so I hope the field doesn't shoot itself in the foot collectively by forgetting the business that they're in. The business that they're in is not to sell. The business they're in is to create solutions that are useful. And that can be a wonderful, rewarding, exciting, fun craft, but not if you collect one penny because you got somebody to buy something they didn't need, or you sold somebody something that doesn't do what you told them it would do.
In many regards, marketing has danced this line between, and this is just my perspective, between manipulating people to do things and helping them see a social good as well. So, we had the ad campaigns and things like that had gone out, Schoolhouse Rock and other, these kinds of things, that there's a social good, there's a social benefit. And one of the areas that I've been looking at right now is cybersecurity. And here we have a $2 trillion threat that is growing to $6 trillion by, the generals of the U.S. Cyber Command and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and all the cybersecurity experts saying this is a massive problem and we're at war, and this is a war that we're losing. And the problem is that the victims and the soldiers both are you and me and our kids and our parents and our families and friends. They're going after soft targets. They're going after school systems and hospitals and utilities. And the solution, unfortunately, is that we all have to become aware of the threats that we're under when we're connecting to devices and things like that. From a marketing standpoint, how do you get people to change their behavior about something like cyber hygiene?
Well, so I think it's a complicated challenge for sure. I guess as I think about that, I go, one of my professors at Harvard Business School, Michael Beers, had this sort of algebraic conceptualization of change, what it takes to create change. And his formula was change equals V times, and I might have the actual words wrong, but V times S times D. And V stood for vision. So change requires a vision. It requires a strategy for achieving that vision. And D stands for dissatisfaction. And the reason there are multiplication signs in his concept is because if there is not universal dissatisfaction, there will be no change. If D is zero, no matter how great the vision, no matter how great the strategy, there will be no change. And as a leader, I have used that my whole career when being faced with either turnarounds or transformations. The first thing I've done as a leader in the first 90 days everywhere I've been is to try to establish universal dissatisfaction with the status quo. And that is the first place you have to begin, because if not everybody is just instantly shares the same, concern or fear that more learned, more enlightened people like yourself legitimately have, but folks just don't slow down enough to think about something like that in a way where it is menacing to them. And, they've got it in this little compartmentalized place. Oh, yeah, that's something that happens to Citibank, or that's something that happens to, the government or whatever. But, and yeah, what's the worst that could happen? I guess I lose my identity. That would suck. But, I don't. So I think that I think that what you have is a society that has very highly variable levels of dissatisfaction with the problem, number one. And so again, managerially, when I'm faced with that, I take my people through a process of helping them discover why status quo sucks, why doing nothing, by doing to tomorrow what we did yesterday is not good, not healthy. But until you bring that into living color for people and get them to be dissatisfied, they are not going to go to the next step to say, well, what do you have in mind then? What is your vision then? Now I care. So what is the vision? How do I do it? So that on something like cybersecurity, I think establishing a more palpable, concrete form of what the threat represents to people would be where I would start. I would start there. What can I do to dramatize this, to make it appeal to the self-interests of the common person, the everyman out there? What can I do to create a sense of alarm among the everyman? Because in the absence of that, I was helping a firm, a medical cannabis company, and I was explaining to the CEO that until and he was working on some policy change, trying to get some policy change at the government level and among legislators and so forth. And my assertion to him was, you cannot get policy change until you have it in the hearts of people. It has to be, when you look at all the policy change over the course of time, none of it was ever successfully invoked without the will of people, without people being able to connect to what it meant to them, right? And so the duty, I think, in this case of a marketer would be to focus on articulating the threat, making it real. Now, again, not falsely, not in some, a borrowed interest way, but in real terms, what is that threat? And why should every man care about it? That would be the first campaign I would put out there. And then I would, from there, start to layer on a communication plan and a policy plan or whatever else that dealt with it. But right now, you have a very narrow band of people who are in the know on what this represents, other than it's like a kitchen table word that doesn't really bring with it much depth of meaning to a person. I don't think. That would be my hypothesis. And therefore, you need to work on building dissatisfaction, building out that D in order to create change.
Now,
that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And we have tried that. Now, one of the aspects that maybe we're running up against, especially amongst people that are technologists or people that use technology a lot, and that's not necessarily technologists, but anybody that uses technology a lot, they get all these alerts and things like that, and that, we may be causing learned paralysis. I know that I'm being attacked. I know that people are are trying to get at me, and I know that these big companies have been hacked. What chance do I have? And I'm just going to give up and, just roll the dice. There's nothing I can do, or I just don't feel like there's a way I can.
But one of the things, Sid, that people again, would be a hypothesis that I would seek to prove, is that I think that right now there is as much noise around cybersecurity damage. There's as much noise about messaging to people over what you can do to protect yourself at some price, that I believe people have some mistrust over. I get something from Morgan Stanley that says, sign up for this and we'll protect you. I get something from somebody else, sign up for this and we'll protect you. But then I get some that say, sign up for this for $9.99 a month and I'll protect you. And then I start to wonder, like, is that are they real, right? So I think you've got a consumer who, trust is a very, very precious thing now. We know brand loyalty has been declining since World War II. Trust is in a very turbulent orbit itself, and being able to help people feel comfortable about the solutions, I think, is as much of a challenge as it is making them aware of the threat. Because right now, there are lots of people that are seeking to benefit on the threat of cybersecurity, right? And I suppose they deserve to. Companies deserve to come up with solutions that really work. But I think people are again confused. How much protection do I need? Do I need to sign up for Norton and this and that? I think that, again, you've got people. This is dizzying for the average American, for the average person, I think.
This notion of trust has come back into my world over and over and over again from all sorts of different disciplines. Even the neuroscientists were talking about trust. I'm a volunteer with the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education, which was formed in response to a presidential executive order, and it's under the U.S. Department of Commerce right now, with a partnership with the Department of Homeland Security. Their objective is to strengthen the cyber security of the nation and the cyber hygiene of the workforce and the public as a whole. The problem is that there's little or no funding to actually do a lot of this work. And so we're in a situation where we've got this monumental task. How do we change the cyber hygiene of the U.S. workforce, and no budget to do it?
How could there be no budget? How could there be an inability to fund something so macro and so fundamental to the infrastructure of society? I don't understand that. I mean, you mean there's not even any organized group? There's no way to get industry to pitch in something on this? And
yeah, so that's what that National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education is about. They're trying to bring all of the different players that are involved, both from industry, from academia, from government, and bring them all in one organization where they can communicate, talk about the issues and things like that. What I specifically am referring to is there doesn't seem to be any real substantial funding for like the public service announcements that we had about cybersecurity. And I'll back it off a little bit. I don't know how much funding is really there. There is some funding for this national organization, but it is limited. They don't have the budget or the marketing campaign that something like a Burger King or an Arby's would have. And the task, in my opinion, is monumental. So it's how can we make something, a movement around this? How can we increase that dissatisfaction while maintaining the trust that we need to with the public? Any thoughts?
Well, again, this certainly marketing can be part of the solution for that. I believe, the intersection between marketing and public policy is powerful, can be powerful. My agency at Burger King, which really kind of got put on the map because of the work they did for us, was the same agency that did the Truth campaign for anti-smoking, and was profoundly effective at reducing smoking rates. And of course, they shocked people with body bags being stacked up outside the Philip Morris building, and various images that were very shocking to the sensibilities of people. And so, again, that sort of comes back to how can we dramatize the problem for consumers. I would be surprised if one of the journals we own is the Journal of Public Marketing and Public Policy. I'd be surprised if there isn't somebody in our field doing something on this. Have you looked in the Journal of Marketing for Public Policy archives at all, or?
I haven't, but I certainly will now.
Yeah. Are you an AMA member?
I am not.
Okay. Well, you got to join the AMA. And if you join the AMA, you'll have unlimited access to all of our journals digitally, and you can go into the Journal Marketing and Public Policy, and I just would be shocked if there has not been work done on various phenomenon that's being observed in that space. So, I mean, again, that's where I start, because I know so little about this. I would start there myself, just to try to see how people are thinking about this issue, who've spent more time than I have. And there may be something there that spurs you, to think of, some other idea.
You were, and I'm not a marketer, but it seemed to me as an outsider that you're one of the mavens about viral marketing campaigns. Now, what would you say are the key ingredients to making a movement go viral?
Well, virality is, much like real viruses, are very complicated and in some ways inexplicable. I used to tell people when I was on the industry side that, viral marketing was like drilling for oil. You just have to you really have to keep drilling holes until one pops. There's no formula that's going to generate in any reliable way a successful viral marketing campaign. I think that we were the first ones in industry to generate content-generated branded advertising that became viral back in 2003 with the subservient chicken, which, billions of hits in 175 countries and so forth. And you could still Google subservient chicken and get a look at what that campaign was that we used to introduce a new chicken sandwich. And because Burger King is about have it your way, this was about being able to tell a chicken what to do, being able to boss around a chicken. And it became viral, fantastically successful. We have had other, following that, we sort of, we were the ones who ushered in content-generated share of voice and viral marketing and digital advertising. All that was all, arguably, we were the first nose across the finish line on that. I don't know who else would stake claim to that. But when we did it, we were as surprised as everybody else as to which ones would hit and which ones wouldn't hit. We had other efforts that, you can certainly try to create conditions for virality, just like a real virus, but you still can't necessarily make it happen, as systematically as you want. You really have to commit to virality as a way of doing business, having teams, focused on it, looking for, basically you want ideas that are shareable, that are entertaining, people, the concept we used to say is people like to be the first person to tell you about a new restaurant, right? And so appealing to that idea of, did you see that last night? You got to see this kind of factor. And what that is anybody's guess. It starts with, again, immersing yourself in the market, immersing yourself in what it is you're trying to create, what your ultimate solution is that you're hoping will get noticed because of the viral campaign, and then creating an environment where you're pushing out little, tipping points and hoping one of them tips the dominoes over, and all of a sudden it goes around everywhere, right? And so, you can Google 100 different, quote, best practices in viral marketing. But ultimately, the most important thing about viral marketing is a commitment to it, and to understand that it is not a process that can be guaranteed any more than drilling oil can be. I mean, you can get the geological reports and all that stuff, but you're still drilling for oil. And so I guess it's one of those things where I'll know it when I see it. When I saw subservient chicken as a concept, I thought this could be great. Turned out we were right. I saw other concepts down the line. This could be great. Didn't turn out to be great. Other ones where I'm like, and they turned out to be great. Other things. So, our Whopper Freakout was a highly successful viral campaign where we took the Burger King Whopper out of our restaurants for a day and filmed customer reactions. That was viral. That went viral. Virality is about shareability. It's about relevance. Certainly, it's got to be about relevance. Relevance is more important than even uniqueness. But being different is more important than being excellent. So that's kind of like the pecking order of values. Relevance is more important than being unique, but differentiation is more important than being excellent. And so finding relevant, highly differentiated ideas that are at the intersection of your solution and the customer is where the magic is. Finding that intersection where your solution and the customer intersect in a relevant, differentiated way. That's where the magic happens. And so, again, I think identifying, if we think that problem number one is that not enough people think this is a serious enough problem to lift a finger for, then to me that should be your number one challenge. And so I would focus my viral campaign, I would focus all my resources around creating universal dissatisfaction with the way things are. Because without that, there's nothing, no vision, no solution is even going to appear, it's not going to move the needle. You have to get people fed up. There's someone else once said, nothing important ever happened in this world without people being fed up with the way it was, right? And you got to get people to be fed up with the whatever it is, complacence that sits out there, or the lack of engagement that's out there. And I know you can do it. It can be done. But that's to me, that's your goal. You need to get smart people thinking about that. How do I create universal dissatisfaction, get people fed up with the lack of clarity and the complacency that sits around cybersecurity, what it means to me, what it means to them.
I've got two questions more if you've got the time. One thought that we had, because we have very limited resources, was to actually have a contest by which the public would submit videos or some sort of content, and then we would have communities vote on which presentations or which content they thought was most imaginative, most creative, most complete, most motivating.
Communication about what?
About cybersecurity, about cyber hygiene. That makes sense?
Yeah.
And so what we would do is, instead of taking the ideas that you had mentioned previously, to have this, to expect one group of people to be able to come up with content that would be personalized to the point where the entire U.S. workforce would adopt it, would be very, very difficult. On the other hand, if we said, well, we'll incentivize you in some minor way to come up with the content yourself, and then what we'll do is we'll reward the ones that were the best from each of the communities, whether it was by industry or by company or by organization or by state, I don't know, but to have some sort of a contest, and their peer groups would decide which ones were most effective. It was an approach that I had come up with to see if we could move the needle, move the awareness to a higher degree without spending a lot of money. Would
the objective of those presentations be to create universal dissatisfaction with the problem, or would it be to, that's the part, to me that's the most important thing you can do. And if that concept helps elevate that, then, I guess it's worth a try. It doesn't strike me, in the absence of actually seeing what it might look like, as a contagion concept necessarily. But I think you've really got to reduce this issue down to what will make me care. One question one question I have is, do you have any research at all, and there must be some research out there that ranks where cybersecurity sits on people's concerns?
Well, funny enough, it depends greatly on the position or the work that a person does. So I can say, for example, amongst product developers, in our little community, which is it's a high-tech hub, but it may not be indicative of every other place. It seemed to be about the 8th most important thing, or 9th most important thing, the topic that they had. And again, it's not a scientific study. I can't say that, but it was. But
that's among people where you would expect some elevated appreciation for it, wouldn't you?
Yes. And so it's on their radar. It's something that they're thinking about, but they're not really changing behavior around it. And that's the problem. And so what we were thinking about, and our discussion, you've actually put, you've highlighted a discrepancy that we had in this plan, where we weren't talking about getting them to articulate their dissatisfaction. But the thought was that it's difficult for the scientists and the software developers and the technologists to come up with a plan that could go viral. That's unfortunately not a skill set many of us have in that world. But on the other hand, if we would have opened this up to the entire public as a whole, then maybe we would have a chance, one of their submissions would have a chance of going viral. Somebody came up with something that was clever, from Dubuque or something like that would resonate, that we would never have come up with on our own. That was the idea. We would solicit the public to say, hey, listen, how would you communicate this information?
It could work. I obviously have not spent nearly the time you've spent thinking about all this, but I think if you could tell me, what in your view would be a communication that would allow anybody and everybody to appreciate the magnitude of the problem, to become dissatisfied, what would you say to them? And then what? Once you got their attention, then what? If you could tell me those two things, I can start to think a little bit more in my spare time about ways for you to, because I think I spoke a little bit in the presentation with you guys about rituals and the importance of trying to, when you become a ritual, you sort of made it, when you become part of a ritual. And it seems to me that there might be a component to cybersecurity and cyber hygiene that requires a ritualistic behavior. I wake up in the morning, I brush my teeth, I check my phone, what else do I do that could help is there some tiny action that can become a daily ritual, meaning a habit that has meaning? So getting somebody to do something that has meaning for them every day, that's not onerous. If it would be, if it's like restarting my phone, if restarting my phone every morning was the best way for me to ensure cyber security, you could probably convince me to do that. And then you would be able to, I think, with virility, be able to communicate to people. Number one, you go back to the first question, why do I care? And then what do you want me to do about it? And the what you want me to do about it is going to be the next hurdle. Because what you want me to do about it is complicated or something I don't understand, forget it, right? So if this is truly something that should be on everybody's minds, that you need everybody's engagement to protect against the threat of cybersecurity, in what way? What do you need from them? What do you need them to do? You could tell me that, I can help you. Why do I care? And what do you want me to do once you got my attention? Just help me with those two things, and then I can try to help you further. Is that fair?
That's very fair, and I can talk with you more about this offline. But I want to also be very respectful of your time. You've been in a lot of interviews, and you've been asked a lot of questions. What's a question that I should have asked that I didn't?
You've asked good questions, so I don't really feel like you somehow overlooked something.
Is there anything on your radar that's not on the rest of us? What are you looking at into the future and saying this is going to be a game changer? This is going to be something that is really going to just turn everything upside down.
In what context?
Marketing.
Oh,
communicating.
Well, yeah. There are a number of potential game changers out there, with blockchain and cryptocurrency and those kinds of things, but I can't control what happens there, or I don't even know what it means to the everyday person yet, but I try to make it my business to think about the industry of marketing and to make sure that the industry is behaving well and is staying in front of other disciplines so that it continues to have a voice at the table in any enterprise. And I do think that the increasing the possibilities that come from the intersection of marketing and public policy are very exciting. And I think that also represents a chance to be a compass for marketers to understand the impact of their work and ethics around their work. And like I said, a world where everything is bought, nothing is sold, probably won't happen in my lifetime. But that's kind of, to me, that's a bit of a slog. Like, I don't think there's some speech I can make somewhere to get everybody start operating that way. But I want to at least get people to start thinking about it, and I try to send everybody off from every presentation I make thinking about that. And maybe if it makes sense to enough people, it'll start to take hold and become a thing,
Well, and it seems like that's something that's a movement that's already occurring in a way, right? We have the idea of the used car salesman, the slick person who just manipulates us into buying things seems to be going away, right? We've empowered the consumer to have all the information that they need to know whether or not the person is selling snake oil or not.
Yeah, I guess so. I think that in some ways that's true, but I still think that the marketer has more data than the customer has. And I think they have a responsibility for how they use that data. And while the used car salesman may not have a plaid jacket and a toupee in a lot somewhere, I think there are plenty of used car salesmen online, even running big companies out there. And I think we all have to take interest in keeping an eye on that.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Russ. You've been really spectacular, and thank you for visiting us and giving a wonderful, thought-provoking presentation.
You're welcome. I hope it proves useful. So keep me posted.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.